My daughter-in-law stood up first, wine bottle already in her hand, and said, "Maybe this will finally get through to you, Margaret." Then she tipped the bottle and poured it slowly over my head, right there at my own dinner table, red wine running down my gray hair and onto the white blouse I'd ironed that morning. Nobody at that table laughed. Nobody gasped either. They just watched, waiting to see what an old woman would do. And here is the part none of them understood. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I reached for my napkin, wiped my face, and looked at my watch. Because what nobody sitting at that table knew was that in exactly 22 minutes, 2 patrol cars were going to pull into my driveway. And by the time they left, every secret my family had been keeping from me and from each other was going to be sitting out in the open like dishes nobody wanted to clear. My name is Margaret Whitfield. I'm 63 years old, and I live on 110 acres outside a small town called Rye Creek, Montana, on land that's been in my husband's family since 1954. Walter passed 3 years ago from a heart that finally gave out after 41 years of working this ground, and since then it's just been me, the cattle, and a dog named Scout who sleeps by the door like he's still waiting for Walter to come back in from the barn. Our son Dale is 37. He married a woman named Renee about 6 years ago, and they have one daughter, Casey, who's 8. Dale runs a feed supply business in town, and for a long time I thought that marriage, that life, was a good one. I want to tell you now, before this story goes any further, that I'd love to know in the comments if you've ever had a feeling about someone in your own family. A feeling you couldn't quite prove, long before anything happened to confirm it. Because that's exactly where this story starts. And if stories like mine mean something to you, I hope you'll stay till the end and subscribe, because there's a lot more of this to tell. The feeling started about 4 months before that dinner. Renee's brother, a man named Curtis Prue, had gotten himself into some kind of trouble down in Billings. I never learned the whole shape of it, only pieces. Whispers Dale let slip when he thought I wasn't listening closely. Something about a business loan gone bad, and men Curtis owed money to who weren't the kind you could just apologize your way out of. Around that same time, Renee started asking me things she'd never asked before. How much the land was worth, whether Walter had left it free and clear, whether I'd ever thought about what would happen to it if something happened to me. She always asked with a smile, always wrapped it in concern, but I taught myself a long time ago, first as a ranch wife and later just as a woman who'd learned to survive on her own, that you listen to what people ask you more than what they say to you. I didn't say anything to Dale at first. I didn't want to believe my own son's wife would look at Walter's land, the land his father cleared by hand, and see it as a way out of somebody else's mess. But I started keeping a small notebook in my kitchen drawer, dates and conversations, nothing dramatic, just an old woman being careful. And about 6 weeks before that dinner, I drove into town and sat down with a lawyer named Harold Voss, a man who'd handled Walter's estate and who I trusted the way you trust someone who's already seen you at your worst. I told him what I'd been noticing. I told him about Curtis, about the questions, about the way Renee's eyes moved around my kitchen, like she was already deciding where the furniture would go. Harold didn't tell me I was imagining things. He told me something that stuck with me. He said, "Margaret, people don't usually walk straight up and take what they want. They wear you down first, a little at a time, until handing it over feels like the only way to get some peace." He helped me put the deed into a protective trust that week, quietly, with nobody else knowing. And he gave me his cell number and told me to call him the moment anything felt wrong. I laughed and told him nothing was going to happen at a family dinner. I was wrong about that in a way I never expected to be. 2 weeks before it happened, Dale called me on a Sunday evening, his voice doing that thing it used to do as a teenager right before he asked me to cover for something. He said Renee's parents wanted to come out for a proper family dinner, all of us together. and maybe it was time we all sat down and talked things through as a family. I told him that sounded fine. I had no reason yet to say no to my own son, wanting to bring people to my table. What I didn't know, what I only pieced together much later, was that Curtis Pruitt had told his sister he needed money within the month, or there would be real consequences, the kind that don't stay contained to one person. And Renee had already decided in her mind that my empty guest rooms and my 110 acres were the answer to a problem that was never mine to solve. The night of the dinner came in cold and clear, the kind of Montana evening where the sky turns the color of a bruise right before dark. Dale, Renee, and Casey arrived first, Casey running straight for Scout the second she got out of the car. Renee's parents came about 20 minutes later, and right behind them, a car I didn't recognize pulled up and parked at the end of my driveway instead of near the house. A man got out, stayed by his car, didn't come to the door. I asked Dale quietly who that was, and he told me it was just a friend of Curtis's, dropping something off. Nothing to worry about. I remember how carefully he said it. The way you say something you've rehearsed. I let it go because I had a ham in the oven and a granddaughter tugging on my sleeve asking if she could set the table with her grandmother's good dishes, the ones that used to be Walter's mother's. Dinner started around 6. For the first half hour, it was almost pleasant. Renee's mother complimented the biscuits. Renee's father talked about the price of hay. Casey told a long, meandering story about a frog she'd found at school that made everyone laugh. And for a little while, I let myself believe this really was just a family dinner. It was somewhere around the second helping of potatoes that Renee set her fork down and looked around my dining room the way she'd been looking at it for months, slow, appraising, like she was already living in it. This place is really too much house for one person, Margaret, she said. All this land, sitting here, and Curtis is out there right now with nowhere safe to go. I told her I was sorry for whatever trouble her brother was in, and I meant that, but my home and my land weren't a solution I was willing to hand over. Not to Curtis, not to anyone. Dale reached over and put his hand on my arm, the way you calm a spooked animal, and said, "Mom, just hear her out, please. This is bigger than you think it is." I told him plainly that whatever was bigger than I thought, I still had a right to know the truth of it before anyone asked me to sign my name to anything. That's when Renee's face changed, the polite mask sliding off fast the way I'd started to expect it would eventually. She said if I really cared about this family, I'd stop being so stubborn about a piece of land that wasn't even doing anything but growing grass. I told her calmly that stubborn wasn't the word for a woman protecting the last thing her husband left behind. That was when she stood up, grabbed the wine bottle sitting between us, and poured it slowly over my head in front of her own daughter, in front of her parents, in front of my son, who sat frozen in his chair with his mouth half open and said nothing at all. I want you to understand something. I had been waiting, without fully admitting it to myself, for exactly this kind of moment. The moment someone in my own family finally showed everyone at that table who they really were underneath all the smiling and the careful questions. I wiped my face with my napkin, set it down neatly beside my plate, and looked at the clock on my kitchen wall. 22 minutes, I thought, because 3 days earlier, that unfamiliar car parked at the end of my driveway had finally made sense to Harold Voss, and to a detective he'd quietly connected me with. Once we learned exactly who Curtis Pruitt's associates really were, and exactly what kind of trouble had followed him all the way out to my land. And right on time, headlights swept across my dining room windows, red and blue lights turning slowly against the dark, as 2 patrol cars came up my driveway and stopped right behind that stranger's car still idling at the end of it. For a moment, nobody at my table moved. Renee still had the empty wine bottle in her hand. Dale was half out of his chair, staring at the window like he couldn't make sense of what he was seeing. Casey asked in a small voice, if the police were coming to see the frog she'd told everyone about, and nobody answered her. I stood up, wine still dripping from the ends of my hair, and walked to my own front door before anyone else could reach it, because whatever was about to happen in my house, I intended to be the one who opened that door. 2 officers came up the porch steps first, a younger one named Officer Reyes and an older man, Sergeant Colby, who I recognized from church years ago, back when his mother used to sit 2 pews behind Walter and me. Behind them, a 3rd car pulled in, unmarked, and a woman in plain clothes got out, moving straight toward the man who'd been sitting in the car at the end of my driveway the whole evening. Sergeant Colby looked past me into the dining room, at Renee still standing with the bottle, at the wine soaked into my collar, and asked if everyone in the house was safe. I told him we were for now, and stepped back to let him in. The detective, a woman named Paulson, was the one who finally said out loud what I had only understood in pieces until that night. She explained, standing in my dining room while Casey's grandmother pulled the girl gently into the kitchen and out of earshot, that Curtis Pruitt owed a considerable amount of money to men who did not forgive debts quietly, and that one of those men had been following Curtis for weeks, hoping he'd lead them somewhere they could collect. That man was the one who'd been sitting in the car at the end of my driveway all evening, waiting to see if Curtis would show up at a family dinner, the way Renee had apparently promised him he would. In exchange for money, Renee had agreed to get however she could. I looked at Renee then, and for the first time since she'd married my son, I watched every bit of the polished, patient version of her fall away completely. She said it wasn't like that she'd only told the man Curtis might be there, that she hadn't known he'd actually come, that she'd been trying to protect her brother, not put anyone in danger. Dale turned to her slowly, his face doing something I hadn't seen since he was a boy caught in a lie too big for him to talk his way out of. "You told him where my mother lives," he said, not as a question. "You used my mother's house as bait to get your brother's debt collector to show up." Detective Paulson explained, more gently than I probably deserved given how frightened I actually was underneath my calm, that this was exactly the situation Harold Voss had quietly flagged to her department 3 days earlier, after he learned through his own contacts just how serious Curtis's trouble had become. And after I told him about the strange questions Renee kept asking about my land, Harold hadn't waited for something to happen. He'd made sure that if that car ever showed up at my house, there would be officers close enough to respond within minutes, not hours. What none of us at that table had known was that the wine glass, the argument about the land, and the man idling in his car at the end of my driveway were never separate things happening on the same unlucky night. They were the same plan, arriving all at once, whether Renee had fully admitted that to herself or not. The man in the car was brought in for questioning about an outstanding matter unrelated to my family, and Curtis, it turned out, hadn't even been planning to come to the dinner at all. He'd been using his sister to draw his creditor somewhere quiet, somewhere he thought wouldn't come back on him, never once considering what it might cost the family who'd fed him at their table more times than I could count. Renee wasn't arrested that night. There was no law against poor judgment or a poisoned kind of loyalty to a brother who'd never once done the same for her. But there was a report filed, my name and my land now formally noted as having been used without my knowledge or consent, in a matter involving organized debt collection, and Harold told me later that alone was enough to make sure nothing like it could happen quietly again. Dale stayed the night at my house, sending Renee home with her parents and a very confused, very tired Casey, who fell asleep in the car before they even reached the end of the driveway. He sat at my kitchen table long after the patrol cars left, turning a coffee cup around in his hands without drinking from it, and told me he didn't know what to do with what he'd just learned about his own wife. I didn't try to tell him. I'd learned a long time ago that you can't hand somebody their own decision. You can only sit with them while they find it. I told him I loved him, that none of what happened that night was his fault, but that he was going to have to decide, clearly and honestly, what kind of family he wanted to keep building, and who, It took Renee and Dale almost 8 months to separate for good. There wasn't a single dramatic ending to it, just a slow unraveling of trust that had already been thin before that dinner ever happened, made impossible to ignore once it had been. Curtis moved out of state not long after, and I never did learn exactly how his debts got settled. Only that Harold's contact in the department told me the matter closed itself out quietly enough that nobody came looking around Rye Creek again. The land stayed exactly where Walter left it, safe inside the trust Harold had built for it, waiting for Casey's name to be added someday, when she was old enough to understand what it had taken to keep it whole. Dale brings Casey out most weekends now, and some Saturdays he stays for supper, the two of us at that same table, the wine glasses these days holding nothing stronger than sweet tea. The stain never did come all the way out of that white blouse, and instead of throwing it away, I cut it down into cleaning rags I keep folded in the mudroom, the same drawer where I still keep that small notebook Harold once told me to start. Don't need it anymore, not really, but some habits, once they've kept you safe, are hard to set back down. If you made it this far, I'd love to know in the comments where you're watching from tonight, and whether you've ever had to protect something quietly, long before anyone around you understood why. If this story meant something to you, stay close, hit subscribe, because there are more stories like mine still waiting to be told.